What would you do if your entire city burned down in just 4 days? What if everything you owned, your home, your street, your church, disappeared overnight? Because in September 1666, that's exactly what happened to London. A single fire started in a bakery and soon turned into one of the most devastating urban disasters in European history. But here's the strange part most people don't know. The fire didn't just destroy London. It completely reinvented it. In this video, we're going to step back into the smoking ruins of London in 1666, walk through the ashes of the medieval city, and watch how an entirely new capital rose from the destruction, from radical architectural plans to political chaos, to the birth of the modern London skyline. This is the story of how London rebuilt itself after the Great Fire, and why the city you see today exists because of it. Before the fire, London was a medieval maze. The streets were narrow. The buildings leaned toward each other, so closely that neighbors could shake hands from their windows. Most houses were made of timber, pitch, and plaster, materials that burned easily, and the upper floors often hung out over the street, creating dark, crowded corridors. It was beautiful. But it was also a perfect fire trap. London in the 1600s had no organized fire department. If a fire started, residents had only a few tools to stop it: buckets of water, leather fire pumps, and the most extreme solution: tearing down houses to create fire breaks. But on the night of September 2nd, 1666, these measures wouldn't be enough. Just after midnight, a small fire started inside the bakery of Thomas Farriner on Pudding Lane. At first, it didn't seem unusual. Fires happened frequently in London. But this time, the conditions were different. A powerful east wind began pushing the flames through the tightly packed wooden buildings. Within hours, the fire spread across entire streets. The flames leapt from roof to roof. Burning embers flew through the air like deadly snow. And by morning, the fire had become unstoppable. Over the next 4 days, London experienced what many witnesses described as a firestorm. Entire neighborhoods burned at once. The sky glowed red for miles. And thousands of terrified residents fled toward the River Thames with whatever belongings they could carry. People loaded carts with furniture. Boats on the Thames overflowed with refugees. Some buried valuables in the ground, hoping to retrieve them later. Others simply ran. By the end of the disaster, the scale of destruction was staggering. The Great Fire destroyed 13,000 houses, the 87 parish churches, Fossick Paul's Cathedral, most government buildings in the City of London. Nearly 80% of the medieval city had vanished. An area of 436 acres was reduced to smoking rubble. London, the largest city in England, was now a burned-out shell. But in the ashes of disaster, something unexpected began to happen. Because suddenly, London had a rare opportunity. to start again. In the days after the fire, London looked like a war zone. Charred beams stuck out of blackened ruins. Stone walls stood alone without roofs. The smell of smoke and ash filled the air for weeks. Thousands of people were suddenly homeless. Many camped in open fields outside the city. Others built temporary shelters using salvaged wood. Food became scarce. Disease threatened to spread, but amid the chaos, architects and visionaries saw something different. They saw a blank canvas. For centuries, London had grown randomly. Medieval streets twisted unpredictably. Markets appeared wherever space allowed. There had never been a master plan. But now, everything was gone, and that meant something revolutionary was possible. A new London. One of the most famous proposals came from Sir Christopher Wren. Wren imagined a city inspired by Paris and Rome. Instead of narrow medieval streets, he designed wide boulevards and grand squares. His plan included large public plazas, a straight, organized streets, a monumental architecture. It would have transformed London into one of the most elegant cities in Europe. Another architect, John Evelyn, proposed a similar vision. His design included geometric city blocks, riverside promenades, and massive public buildings. For a brief moment, London stood at a crossroads. It could remain a medieval city rebuilt from the ruins. Or it could become something entirely new. A modern capital. But reality quickly intervened. The biggest problem was property ownership. London land was divided among thousands of private owners. Each person wanted their exact property, boundaries restored. Redesigning the entire city would require years of legal disputes, and the city couldn't wait that long. London needed homes, businesses, markets, immediately. So instead of rebuilding from scratch, officials made a compromise. The street layout would mostly remain the same. But strict new rules would change how buildings were constructed. These new laws would permanently reshape the city. First, timber buildings were banned in central London. New houses had to be made from brick or stone. Second, buildings were limited to specific heights. This prevented dangerous, overhanging upper floors. Third, streets were widened wherever possible. And finally, fire prevention became a serious priority. These changes created something that medieval London never had before: urban safety regulations. Meanwhile, Christopher Wren was given a monumental task: to rebuild one of the most famous buildings in England, St. Paul's Cathedral. The old medieval cathedral had been completely destroyed by the fire. What Wren designed instead would become one of the most recognizable landmarks in Europe. But rebuilding London would take far more than architecture. It would require decades of construction and thousands of workers. In the years after the fire, London became one of the largest construction sites in the world. Stone masons, bricklayers, carpenters, laborers, all worked to rebuild the city piece by piece. Slowly, the blackened ruins disappeared. New brick houses rose, where wooden ones once stood. Churches were rebuilt across the city, and Christopher Wren began his most ambitious project. He would eventually design 52 new churches for London, but his masterpiece was St. Paul's Cathedral. Construction began in 1675. The cathedral would take 35 years to complete. Its massive dome, inspired by Renaissance architecture, transformed London's skyline. For the first time, the city had a structure that symbolized strength and rebirth. But the rebuilding process did something even more important. It modernized London. Brick buildings made fires far less likely to spread. Wider streets improved movement through the city. New regulations improved sanitation and planning. And over time, the rebuilt London became stronger than the city that burned. By the early 1700s, visitors arriving in London saw something remarkable. A city that had survived catastrophe and emerged more impressive than before. The Great Fire had destroyed medieval London, but it had also cleared the way for the birth of the modern city. Today, if you walk through London's financial district, you are walking across the ground where the fire once raged. Some of the streets still follow the medieval layout, but the buildings are made of stone, brick, and steel, a legacy of the disaster that changed everything, and perhaps that is the most fascinating part of the story. Because sometimes history's greatest destruction becomes the foundation for something greater. London didn't just survive the Great Fire. It reinvented itself, and the city we know today exists because it burned.